Hello and welcome to another episode of SyrupCast. I am Daniel Bader, and if you haven't been following, the SyrupCast is still very much alive. It's limping, it's not wearing any pants, but it's still here.
No pants.
As always, I am joined by Douglas Soltis, my partner in pod. We are podcasting on Friday morning. It is sunny outside. Douglas, how's your head today?
My head sucks, man.
Why?
I'm sick and I'm dirty and I'm tired and I'm pantsless and I'm potting because the people want it.
So you got bedhead. I like that. If you're not watching this live or on YouTube, you really should. You should switch off your MP3. You should turn off your Overcast. You should shut down your Pocket Casts. Well, actually, Pocket Cast supports videos. You should Raul your Castro.
It's not the worst with the headphones.
No, I think it's very stylish.
It distracts from my face, which is always key.
Yeah, that's helpful. So let's talk a little bit about why we haven't been podcasting. Because it's not like we just decided to, well, not entirely why we decided to just stop podcasting for a month.
I showed up every week, same time, just sat here with a microphone and nothing happened. I don't know how this runs. If Daniel doesn't show up, nothing happens.
So Daniel didn't show up because Daniel got married. So that didn't happen over a month. This wasn't some epic like month-long wedding, but it did feel like it a little. But I decided to take a few weeks off afterwards to sort of what's that Peggle term? The spleens, the splines, recalibrate, reticulate the spleens.
I think you were busy consummating with your wife is what you were doing. I don't know what you're doing with your spleen, but
oh no. Nothing was going on with the spleen.
Whatever's your bag, man.
And we're not talking about that on the podcast. But I did get married. I am now wearing a wedding ring and very happy. And that was a really, really cool day. You were there. You hopefully enjoyed yourself. There's a couple of salacious photos of us grinding up on each other a little bit.
No, slow dancing. We were slow dancing.
Oh, no. That's how it started. If you don't recall.
Yeah.
Things took a turn.
No, but I didn't enjoy myself. You tried to murder me with alcohol. You called me out in front of an auditorium full of people to try.
Oh,
and
I did.
Murder me with
So
booze.
Douglas was at a table that, well, it's not my fault. You played a drinking game.
Jane McIntaggart,
who flew here all the way from somewhere, was so happy. We were so happy that she came, and she decided to start
ruin the
drinking
wedding
game where during the speeches, if you said a certain word, or if somebody said a certain word, you had to drink. So what was your word, Doug? Yes. Your word was That wasn't the smartest word to pick.
No. It's not like I had a choice. Although the irony is that I put that word in hoping that Jane would get it because I didn't want to play the game.
Oh, you didn't pick your own word?
No, you just randomly draw. Yeah, because I strategically thought that would be the best word to choose at a wedding.
I don't know. I thought maybe you thought my family was super articulate and we never ummed and awed and whatever.
I was flying through those speeches until the maid of honor just train wrecked on that microphone.
Yeah, so it was a good night. And after that, we had a really busy September. So there was the iPhone 6s launch. There was the Nexus 6P and 5X launch. There were a few Microsoft launches. One Microsoft launch with a bunch of different devices. And as the mobile industry is wont to do, things kept moving, regardless of whether we podcasted. So suffice it to say, we have a few topics to kill today.
How about them Jays? Starting at the top of the list.
Let's start there. I don't know if we have any American listeners here, but suck it, Texas. We had one of the best. It was just such a great experience being in Toronto on Wednesday night. It really was. We were at the office watching the game. You had to. Oh, you weren't there. You were at home swearing at your computer.
I was home at home throwing things in my kitchen, at living animals and literally like pacing the kitchen because I couldn't sit and watch anymore. And then I just felt my chest get super tight, and I realized that I
having a bad day.
Haven't really followed the Jays in 20 years, right? And I've been carrying my weight. I'm a Raptors fan. I know what it's like. And there was just a moment during that game when the umpires were reviewing their review of the review where I was just like, I don't have the emotional strength to support two Toronto sports teams. But then Joey bats.
Yeah. 7th inning was one to remember. It was unlike anything in sports I think I've ever seen. It was something else. But it was also really frustrating because baseball is such a slow sport in the sense that nothing really happens until something happens. And you kind of live for those moments, right? You live for those errors. You live for those home runs. And then you get all hype and you get all into it. And then, you know, the 7th inning ends and it's not like the game was boring after that, but it never quite hit that peak again.
It was an emotional release.
Yeah. I mean, Asuna, you know, pitching in the 9th was like some serious tension, but you know, we all knew
that kid wasn't even born the last time the Jays were in the playoffs. Was not alive the last time the Jays were in the playoffs.
He's 20 years old. And he's the youngest pitcher to ever get a postseason save in the MLB.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
He's 20 years old.
Unbelievable. With the poise of a 30-year-old.
He wouldn't have been able to drink any of the champagne afterwards. That's how young that kid is.
Thank God he's in Canada, right?
Yeah. Respect.
So, and then there's basketball. We haven't really touched on basketball because it's not back yet. But preseason Raptors home opener started on the 12th preseason against Minnesota. I think they won. I don't think it really matters.
But they played the home opener in Ottawa.
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Shows what I know. I thought they were debuting the new court design. They have a beautiful new We the North court design that's really, really sweet.
Yeah.
And when's the home opener?
I don't know. I just know like basketball starts around October and doesn't really matter till December, till Christmas Day. But yeah, I don't know. The Raptors. It'll be. It's preseason. We shouldn't talk about that. We should talk. We should talk about Toronto FC making the playoffs for the first time in the history of the football club on an amazing goal that very few people in Toronto saw, but those that did freaked the hell out.
Yeah, the 4 people that watched that TFC game during the Jays game really, really freaked it out.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So we are the best. Toronto is the best. And now we can talk about tech.
Yeah, no, we have to wait until we hit 10 minutes. So let's just sit here in silence for about a minute and a half.
We can talk more about your wedding. That's cool.
Let's talk about tech. Let's go into what people are actually here to listen to. Although I think people are increasingly impressed by our amazing sports knowledge. Not, oh, what is that?
It's about them, man.
Are you pressing a French press?
I'm pressing on the pod. This is how little we care about you people. We don't do a podcast for a month, and now you are listening to me French press my coffee.
Oh, I already had my French press. It was awesome. So let's start with the iPhone, because that was the first up since the last time. Even though we spent the entire episode last time talking about Apple, that was a month ago, and that was before the embargoes lifted. So I did my iPhone 6s, 6s Plus review. I'll say 2 things. 3D Touch is not just something that Android OEMs can imitate hardware-wise. What's happened in the last month is that Apple's very rudimentary implementation of 3D Touch, which is this pressure-sensitive feature, it has some capacitive sensors underneath the screen. It detects pressures, different levels of pressure. It has a bunch of different gestures built into the OS. But what I found is that none of Apple's apps really take advantage of it, other than Safari, obviously. But what's really cool is that now we're seeing developers, and in particular, a few of my favorite developers, Dropbox, Evernote, Citymapper, there's another one, Tweetbot. Tweetbot just added awesome peak pop.
Any Twitter app is a great example of why this is so useful, because so many times people will get pulled into Twitter because something has happened through a notification, or there's a specific action they want to perform. Only the truly bored are like, oh, I'm sitting around on my mobile, I'm on the streetcar, let me check Twitter to see if anything's happening. You're always going in to do something. Retweet, fave, you know, Jays, Joey Bats. So to have those quick actions are just like exemplify how useful interfaces can be when done right.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I brushed it off a little bit in the review because I really hadn't spent a lot of time with it, and there was really nothing out there that took advantage of it before the embargo lifted. And what you realize with Apple developers is that they really want to implement these features as quickly as possible. And they'll experiment. You know, some companies have just added quick actions on the home screen. Others have tried peek and pop. And a lot of them are saying, we'll try what we can do now with the SDK, and then we'll experiment and add more as it goes. One of the cool implementations is in AG Drive, which is a kind of a wipeout-like racer, where you can press harder on the screen to throttle, and it doesn't sound like that would be a big deal, but in reality, it's the equivalent of having that joystick and being able to push down and hear that click. You know, I was playing Halo 5 last night on Xbox One, and yeah, humble brag. And I really like the, you know, those tactile controls, and you'll never quite get that without a true mobile controller. But I don't really need that for now. You know, I just need something that works really well and adds a little bit more to my overall experience. I have to say, the 3D touch gestures that I use the most are the swipe from the left edge. So you can see here, you can swipe from the left edge and get into your multitasking. And I use that all the time. I think that is one of the most useful features on the phone. And when I select text now, I select text by pressing down on the screen and issuing that 3D touch gesture. And when I use an Android phone, I do the same thing now because it's become so ingrained in me. And I really hope that at least if Android OEMs are going to copy iPhone in this respect, they do it with a modicum of respect. And
well, isn't it something? It's got to be something you really want Google to implement this at the Android layer, right?
You'd like to, but then they really. I mean, it depends, because when Google releases a bunch of APIs for a new version of Android, developers aren't as quick to adopt them because they know that it's going to take months and months for even the first OEM sold devices to receive it. So, you know, now, and this will be a good transition into the Nexus line, but now we have a bunch of phones that are just getting Lollipop. I mean, the Bell Galaxy S6, well, it shipped on 502, but it's still now only getting 511. And we have the situation where there's still a bunch of devices that are waiting for the last version while the new version is rolling out. So I've been using Marshmallow on the Nexus 6. I like it. I think Now on Tap is really useful. I think that there's a lot of potential there. It's not as smart as I want it to be, and it's not as clear how it's going to change the way that we use our phones, in the sense that it's more nuanced than something like 3D Touch, where there's a tangible change to the way that you use your phone every day. Well, and once you adopt it.
But the difference there is 3D Touch is additional context through action, and on the Android side, it's through information, right? So
Yeah, but
give
it's
me
an
this map
action.
location, or
Right, but what I'm saying is that that action is so important because you do it over and over and over again, and I think that you get the same result, even though you have it. You may use it in different apps. There's a prediction, there's a predictable result every time you use it.
Mhm.
Whereas with Now on Tap, you don't really know what's going to happen. You know, you may assume you'll get the listing of a name or a some sort of news snippet, but I mean, I've used it dozens of times, and every time I'm a little bit taken aback at what data it's pulling out from that piece of text and what it's showing me. So I think over time, once developers actually start integrating the Now on Tap API, it will get better and more reliable. But now it's using the mobile web to just say, okay, I see a bunch of keywords. I see the word Douglas Soltis. You know, here's some information on the words Douglas Soltis, but it doesn't actually go into my contacts and say,
Yeah,
oh, Douglas Soltis on BetaKit wrote this article.
totally.
You have him in your contacts. Here's his number. Here's the last thing you guys emailed about. These are your last text messages. Like, these are the kinds of things that make a lot of sense when you're just trying to get information about somebody really quickly.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was trying to say. So that informational context is requires a lot more legwork to maintain the context, right? Because if it's a button pressed towards an action, as long as consistent across apps, you know that if you perform that, you'll get an effect. Is very different from with Now on Tap, it all being about the type of information being pulled up and understanding how that's relevant. But I think, this is a situation where, similar to just Google Now in general, will iteratively become better and better and better as they establish more hooks to be just smarter about how to handle the information that they have. And then, as you were saying, to know what that information is across different use cases, I guess.
Yeah, I think Now on Tap is a much more epic feature. I'm not comparing 3D Touch to Now on Tap. They're completely different. But you're right. There's something much more grandiose about tapping into the entire knowledge graph every time you just press down on the home button on your Android phone. And
Yeah.
I can't wait until, it's not, I mean, I spoke with the project manager at Google now, who runs Google Now, Aparna, and I don't have her last name in front of me, and I'd butcher it. And as you all know, if you listen to this podcast, I don't do good with names.
Yeah,
I don't do names good. So she explained that Now on Tap is very deliberately limited right now, and that there's a reason it only has a few hooks, because they really need to make sure that the way people use it, and they like actually the fact that Marshmallow is rolling out to a very small subset of devices right now, because then they can monitor how people are using Now on Tap, and they can adjust what sorts of results they give you in the back end. So, because Google's so good at this, right? There's three kind of layers to Android, right? There's the base code, Marshmallow, Android 6.0 Marshmallow. There's the Google Play services that they can update behind the scenes on all phones, and that go all the way back to Froyo. And then there's the actual information that they're accruing all the time, and indexing and roboting, and allowing you to search for on Google itself. It doesn't matter what OS, it's platform agnostic. So they have all of these layers that they work with to make a feature like Now on Tap useful. But the majority of the information that you'll glean from Now on Tap is, for the most part, controlled by them in the back end. So they really don't have to do much to make it better, just like they didn't have to do much to make Google Now better in the first couple of years. From a user update perspective, it just gets better over time. It just gets more useful and more accurate. Whereas Siri on iOS requires, to some extent it gets faster because Apple's voice recognition gets more accurate, but it still requires an OS update to improve in the to the user for the user experience.
Yeah, but I would say, you know, everyone gets that OS update the minute it's available, which is significant.
Totally. Absolutely. And that's, you know, why Google still needs to take control.
I would just be super bummed if I'm like, you know, a Canadian with a nice Sony phone staring down the barrel of maybe getting a lollipop update in the next month or so while Marshmallow's already out.
To be fair, Sony has actually updated most of its devices.
No, I'm just sorry. Just like as a random example, I'm an OEM Android user. I have this phone. There are many others like it, but this one is mine. And I know I'm getting last year's thing. Woo! And now I gotta wait for next year's thing, which might be a good transition to just talk about the Nexus phones themselves, right? Because if you want modern day Android, the minute it's available, if you want the future now,
do you want the best Google phone?
Yeah,
without a bad camera? Buy the Nexus 6P. It won't disappoint you.
Do you want something that fits in your hand or something that does not fit in your hand?
Do you want something that fits in your hand or something that fits in Shaq's hand?
Do you want something that is the size of an iPad mini?
Do you know that
I took that photo and I almost lost my mind.
The Nexus 6P is it's not as big as the 6.
It's
taller.
Intimidating. It's scary.
It's not bad. But did you know that Shaq is an EDM DJ?
Did you wait until I put coffee in my mouth before you said that?
Vice has this like ridiculous article where of course Vice has this ridiculous article, but they embedded a journalist with Shaq as he went to an EDM festival in Atlanta, and he performed a set, and it was awesome. The guy's multi-layered. I mean, we knew he was multi-layered, but
rapper, actor.
Oh yeah, talented actor.
Shout outs to Lamar Odom. Thoughts and prayers going to that guy and his family.
Seriously, hard year that guy's had.
Hard decade, man. That is. But okay, so let's stay on top. Tech podcast. So these phones, I know that we in the office have gone back and forth over the splitting of the Nexus line, but I don't think we're on the pod record about your thoughts of this, right?
Well, those phones didn't really exist when we potted last, as most things didn't. Yeah, I think it makes sense now that I've seen both of them. It's interesting because you have to see it in the context of American pricing. And when you price out the Nexus 6, Nexus 5X, and Nexus 6P in the US, it makes a lot more sense because it's $350 for the 5X US and it's $499 for the 6P. And it's, you know, the 6P is the flagship. It's metal. It's got a faster processor, more RAM, more storage, blah, blah, blah. I mean, all those kind of prerequisites for being a flagship. But at the end of the day, the 5X, if you follow the way that the 5 has aged, and the Nexus 5, if you didn't get a version that, you know, was cracking at the seams out of the box because LG's quality control is terrible, if your Nexus 5 has lasted the almost 2 years since it was released, it's actually a really fast phone still. And that's because Android, when Google released the Nexus 5, it really made a concerted effort to optimize the software for the hardware. And it's become one of those things where every year the Nexus phones just feel demonstrably faster than their OEM equivalents. And, you know, I've been known to kind of get into the weeds of Reddit threads. And, you know, what I hear a lot when people talk about the Galaxy S6, the Galaxy Note 5, they'll say this is one of the fastest phones on the market, but there's so much jank in the UX, in the UI, it just feels slow. It feels like
there's so much chud. There's just so much chud in the UI.
Well, chud, jank, blocks.
No, it was great.
Plink, whatever.
So
It's
so my
one of those things where Samsung just can't get its head around making good Android software.
I hear what you're saying. I just think that my girlfriend's Nexus 5 would disagree,
So
considering
yeah, tell me. You said that before, and I'm curious. So
it acts like
what
a
is it?
phone. So now this might be a factor that she is still a Mobilicity customer.
Oh,
So if we want to talk quality control, I don't know what they're deploying in terms of builds, but I would say her phone acts as if it's cursed.
okay. So first of all, it doesn't matter what carrier you're on because Google pushes the updates to the Nexus line.
They don't have to do
So
any sort of validation. There's nothing.
no.
So then, So then I don't. Her phone will just break. Things will stop working. Apps will do.
And that was a
weird stuff.
well-known thing, but that doesn't seem. It's not a. That's not a software thing. That's a hardware thing. My friend's Nexus 5, his power button stopped responding. His screen started showing lines.
Yeah, but not even like that. Like contacts will merge and unmerge and will show two people at the same time, and like certain apps just won't work anymore. She'll have to delete them and reinstall like very specific things. I've been trying demoing the new Chromecast audio, right? And if you are an iPhone user, not a lot of options for testing that thing out. So we've predominantly been using it off of her Nexus phone, which is kind of one of the reasons why she got it, because she's a hardcore Google Play Music user. And there are just times where that device like will just not stream audio properly. Like it will just screw up the experience in a way that doesn't happen for either my iPhone or from the laptop when I'm casting. It just weird things happen. It's like her phone gets tired every 3 weeks and she has to go through a hard reset.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. I think, I don't want to just chalk it up to random Android weirdness.
But it could be though, because like
it might be.
Because speaking of the schmack and taggart, she loved her Nexus 5, and I think a lot of people really love that Nexus device, and I think this new lineup of phones satisfies the two competing desires of Nexus devices, which is like, hey, we need a flagship Android device to like dictate what Android is and push the experience forward because we can't trust the OEMs to do it. We need a flagship phone. And then there's a bunch of people who are like, we want a really great stock Android phone that's cheap and doesn't suck. And now you have both. And they're not the same phone.
Back when the Nexus 5 was launched, the Canadian dollar was almost at par with the US. So we got a phone that was $350.
Yeah, we're getting destroyed on the exchange is another thing, but just in terms of what you're talking about with pricing tiers, like there are now, it's very hard to have one phone that satisfies every desire. There isn't a phone manufacturer today now that makes only one phone. Apple was the last, or maybe Google was the last, right? Technically.
Right, but I think that since the Nexus 5 was released, and we'll get back to the 5X and 6P in a second, but since the Nexus 5 was released, there have been so many great Android phones in that $300 to $400 range, and even cheaper. Like the new Moto G is like $220 in Canada, and it's totally a fantastic phone that you can live with for 2 years. Even the Moto E, which is like $180, you can live with for 2 years if you really, go crazy on the storage. But I think that's really what, when the Nexus 6 came out and people were like, oh, Google's not updating the Nexus 5, it's not giving us another small phone, they started looking elsewhere. They went to the OnePlus One, they went to the Moto G, the Moto X, LG, Samsung. They've been releasing some decent mid-range phones. But at the end of the day, people want Nexus phones. There's a small contingent of hardcore Nexus users that want, and they know what they're getting with the Nexus line.
Yeah.
With the Nexus 6, that was an aberration. I think we know now in retrospect that wasn't actually supposed to be a Nexus phone. It was supposed to be part of the Android Silver line, which never actually took off. It never came to fruition, and they peeled that back. They peeled that program back. They decided the Nexus 6 would be that year's flagship device, and then reset for 2015. And that's why we have two devices this year, because I think that they had the intention of following up the Nexus 5 with a similar sized phone the entire time. And then they got Huawei in bed, and they said, or Huawei got them in bed and said, hey, we really want this. We really want to cuddle with you.
It was consensual, guys.
Can we
no
collaborate?
Who initiated? It was consensual.
Consensual cuddling.
Yeah. Synergies.
So, yeah, and I think they tried to get as much about the two phones similar as possible. So,
yeah, but the thing is, that doesn't have to be similar. It just has to. They just have to be. They just have to satisfy the two different needs of Android users. Where there is that core contingent that you're saying that just wants, like, I want that cheap, good, reliable, durable, trustworthy phone, and then someone who's like, I want the best phone possible, and I'm an Android user.
Right, but those things are not mutually exclusive anymore. They don't. That the whole point of Android's maturity is that they've realized, many of the OEMs have realized that Apple owns the high end, other than Samsung, because Samsung is stubbornly and rightfully so still going after that high end market. But a lot of the OEMs have conceded to Apple and Samsung, and they say, okay, we can't capture anything in the $700 to $800 range anymore. So we're going to go to the middle. We're going to go where Motorola is really excelling.
Totally.
And we're going to hit that $300-400 range. Like devices like the Alcatel One Touch Idol 3, the Asus Zenfone 2, the Moto G, even the new Moto X Play is like $400. You know, we have a lot of devices in that mid-tier range that, overlooking a few quibbles, and you know, we're a critical bunch, so we are supposed to really, you know, look hard at those faults. But most people, you know, picking up a Moto X Play are not going to go, oh, it only has a Snapdragon 615 and that Adreno 405 GPU. Man, that's
that wrong Snapdragon. No, yeah, no, I completely agree. And sorry, when I'm talking Android here, I'm not talking about like the whole OEM ecosystem. I'm not even considering the OEMs. I'm talking about it from like Google's perspective of like what we need to release, because as much as the OEMs have given up on trying to compete at the high end, except for maybe some of those who you met this week,
subtle.
The first party manufacturers, Google and Microsoft, are going the other way. They're in recognizing that the OEMs can't compete on the high end with Apple. They have been throwing their hat into the ring.
Totally.
And if you want to transition that into the Microsoft, what they're doing, because they're fully a hardware manufacturer now. They're like, we are going to. We have learned lessons from Google. We have learned what didn't work. We learned what our OEMs can do and what they can't do. And it is our responsibility, if we want to get our platforms out there, to release great integrated hardware that shows the capabilities. So people, when they call up an idea of their mind of this platform, they're thinking of the good thing, not like, ooh, yeah, I had a really bad Android phone before, even though it could have been one of those mid-tier, I don't want to crap on any company here, but like one of those mid-tier dirt cheap OEM phones.
So yeah, I agree. But what's interesting about the Nexus 5X and 6P is if you remove what you remember, if you eliminate the price, the absolute price from your mind of the Nexus 4 and Nexus 5, and you take the current market into account with the new Canadian dollar reality of 75 cents to the US dollar, then the Nexus 5X at $499 is still a very cheap phone, because every new phone released from iPhone 6S for the next 2 or 3 years, while the Canadian dollar sits at this 75 cent point, or maybe we'll go lower, until oil rebounds, basically, we're sitting at a 1.25 times pricing model over the US dollar. So The Nexus 5X at $499 seems much more expensive than the equivalent 5 at $349. But in reality, it's not. It's not that much more expensive when you compare it to the high-end phones being released today, like the Galaxy Note 5, the iPhone 6s, even the Huawei Nexus 6P at $700 for the 32 gig model is a considerably better deal for what you're getting.
I completely agree. I'm not saying it's we don't live in the time in which the Nexus 5 came out anymore, like just economically. But the 5X is at least a continuation of that vein. Yeah. I don't know.
So let's actually talk about the phones a little. So the 5X is built with this really nice soft touch plastic. It's a little bit squarer at the corners than the 5, and I don't know if I like that so much. But if you look at it from the back, you'll see that it has a very HTC One X like camera bump, which I like a lot. I think that, you know, OEMs have to be aware that if they want a good camera in their device, they have to have a bit of a camera bump. And of course they want to minimize it, but that's the reality. A camera sensor needs to be big if it's going to have big pixels. And Google is really proud of the camera in these phones. They have 1.5 micron pixels, 12 megapixel sensors. They have really sharp lenses, f2.0 lenses. They've got what I think is a custom, or at least a very, it's not a largely used 12 megapixel Sony sensor. They have digital stabilization. They've got laser autofocus. I mean, these are some serious specs. And what we've seen over the last year is this uniting of the Android ecosystem around its camera. They realized that there were two major facets of the Android experience that were lacking. A lot of them,
7 years after the fact,
Android phones sucked at battery life. They just did. They were terrible. And the cameras were always underwhelming. But now there's been a bit of a flip, and we've seen both qualitative and quantitative results around the fact that the Sony Xperia Z5, the Nexus 6P, the Galaxy S6 and Note 5, these actually have better cameras than the latest iPhones. And as much as Apple has an advantage with its app ecosystem, you can't say anymore that they have an objective advantage when it comes to optics, because they just don't anymore.
Yeah, I think for me the thing that stands out beyond the camera, and I don't want to get too in the weeds on cameras, like a camera podcast is its own thing, but it's the phone seems more beyond all the features which is kind of coming in, which is like as components get smaller and cheaper, these things that used to be like high-end features become kind of core competency requirements. Is that the phone's a lot chummier looking, like a lot more consumer friendly, like than previous Nexus devices. Like it just looks like something that more people would kind of want to pick up and hold and have as their phone. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think this is the year that the Nexus, I mean, if you think about it, the Nexus 5 had a pretty big carrier footprint in Canada. So did the Nexus 4 to some extent, and the Galaxy Nexus. I mean, the Nexus devices have had pretty good relationships with the carriers in Canada. But I think what's going to be interesting this year is to see whether they can compete with at the same price point as the high-end Android phones. So you're getting a $200 Nexus 6P on most of the carriers. Will people choose the Huawei Nexus phone? Do they know the brand over, say, a Galaxy S6, which may cost the same amount? I'm interested to know.
Well, actually, so just going back to that, I just remembered, so we had talked before about Huawei and this being kind of like a foot in the door to North America. Just thought, like, any pickup, anything on like people having more brand awareness of them, or maybe being interested in future Android phones made by them because of this? Like, did they pass the test?
Huawei's never really been a big OEM in the US because most carriers are reticent to stock their devices, especially in the postpaid market. They've provided a bunch of prepaid phones before, but in Canada, it's a little bit different. They have great relationships with the carriers. They haven't had a lot of flagship devices, and they've been conservative in which phones that they release. So they'll release a couple of low end $100 outright phones on Bell or Virgin or something.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the first time we'll see a really high end Huawei phone in stores in North America. And it speaks to the fact that I think this is how they make their mark. Even if the Nexus line never sells in the millions, it'll always get more publicity. It'll be the publicity, the media attention itself outpaces the actual sales numbers. You know, it's disproportionate. We report on the Nexus,
right? Yeah,
but we report on, like, just from our perspective, we report on Nexus phones disproportionately compared to their sales numbers, right? So we are, you know, we have to go where our audience is. A lot of our audience is Android, and a lot of our audience knows about the Nexus product line. But you know, I did this experiment. If you read my OnePlus 2 review, I went to Yonge and Dundas Square and I asked a bunch of random people, "Hey, do you know the iPhone?" Everybody said yes. "Do you know the Galaxy S6? Do you know Samsung?" They said yes. "Do you know the OnePlus? Do you know OnePlus? Do you know what the OnePlus 2 is?" Only a couple people actually said yes.
Totally.
And it was really interesting to hear that, because we think we report on OnePlus just because they're this loudmouth company that has no marketing budget, so they make a stink about everything, and it's been very effective. But what that does is it conveys a disproportionate amount of coverage for a company that in the real world very few people know about. So if you ask the same about the Nexus line, there may be a bit more mind share in Canada because the Nexus line has been sold in carrier stores for the last 4 or 5 years. Yeah. But it's still not nearly to the same level as the iPhone and the Galaxy.
Totally. But again, we've talked about this before. That's why Nexus is so important, because for the average person who would think about it more as Android than the specific OEMs, Google needs them, or hopes for them, to be looking at the best possible version of that product line in their mind when they think of an Android phone. And they might not know it's a Nexus, but like, oh yeah, the Google Android phone. That one's nice.
Yeah, I think they'll I mean, if they know about it, they'll say, "Oh, that's nice." And then they won't buy it, especially if they don't consider it cheap. And I think the reason that most people bought the Nexus 5 was that a lot of the salespeople at carrier stores were like, "What do you want?" They're like, "Oh, I want a cheap phone. Do you want the best cheap phone? Here's the Nexus 5. Totally. That's the conversation a lot of salespeople had with their potential customers.
Yeah. And they probably had the lowest return rate of any of the phones.
I don't know about that.
Well, so that build quality comment aside, but like, if you
want an Android phone, you don't want to futz with the settings, and you want a decent out-of-box experience, the Nexus line will get you probably the closest out of any Android phone, except for maybe the Motorola, the Moto X and those phones, because they run stock.
Yeah.
Do you want to, while we're on Android, let's talk about the BlackBerry Priv, because this is something that the last time we spoke on the pod, it was still the Venice. We knew that it was coming, but we didn't know when. Now we have a lot more information, including a bunch of squandered demos by John Chen. And I think that a lot of our readership is really interested in this phone, if only because it's a well-loved brand delivering a product that that a lot of people have been hoping for, praying for years, right? This is sort of a wish fulfillment product for many people.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interest in it. I think whenever you have like hardware manufacturer now makes Android phone thingy, there's a lot of interest there. I think BlackBerry always still garners a lot of attention whenever they have a piece of hardware out, whether that's, you know, earnest interest or opportunistic interest to maybe slam it or criticize it or fill column inches with saying, you know, here's another reason why these guys are still out of it. But yeah, it's an interesting phone. It looks, some people think it's really sexy. Some people are really excited with the keyboard. Some like, I don't know. Sorry. In what context are we going to have this conversation? Because
you look nervous.
Well, like there's so many, it's not nervous. It's just, are we going to blow up the internet or are we
what are you hiding, Douglas?
What am I? I'm not hiding anything.
You probably have a Priv next to you right now.
Hey, my privilege, my privacy. Like, do we want to talk about the phone or do we want to talk about how BlackBerry continues to screw this stuff up?
Let's spend the next 5 minutes talking about this, and then we'll move on because we're gonna know a lot more very, very shortly.
Soon. You can sign up for email updates of Priv news. I read that on Inside BlackBerry.
So the Priv is we know that it's going to be running Android 5.1.1 out of the box. It's going to have a 5.4-inch 2560 by 1440 pixel display. It's going to have a Snapdragon 808, 3 gigs of RAM, 18 megapixel camera. I mean, these are specky specs, right? These are specs for people that love specs. But at the same time, BlackBerry is not going to be marketing this just on its specs alone. They're going to be talking about the fact that it has a QWERTY keyboard, the fact that it has DTEC, and DTEC is something that I've learned in the last few days is going to be a comprehensive suite of BlackBerry security products. And it's also going to allow, and this is
separate from their other comprehensive suites of security products.
This is a world exclusive. You're hearing it here first. So the way that the BlackBerry Enterprise Service is going to communicate with the Priv is it's going to think of it as a BlackBerry 10 device. It's going to treat it like a BB10 device because DTEC has it assigns a special key to each BlackBerry Priv that allows the BES server to communicate with it in the same way as a BlackBerry 10 device. So what that means is that BlackBerry doesn't have to install and create this entirely new security layer in the back end just for Android. Because obviously BES 10 or BES 12 rather does communicate with Android, but it's not quite as extensive.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily creating entirely new security. It's more that they can take advantage of built-in security layers that Android phones normally can't because there is nothing like this on. They have no root level or OS level kind of control or policy stuff. So this gives them that same level of secure Android control without having to change the underlying OS itself. Yeah,
and Samsung uses Knox on the Galaxy line. This is going to be Knox for BlackBerry.
Yeah. And eliminates all of those horrific dual boot scenarios that only the deepest of the forums would crave.
Well, it also allows BlackBerry admins to control, if they have a suite of mixed devices, if they have a bunch of passports and leaps and classics, as well as a bunch of privs assigned, they don't have to administrate them separately. They have the exact same feature set, the same administrative rules that can apply to all of these devices without having to create special templates specifically for this Android phone.
They don't have to treat it like an Android phone in the way that BES 12 would treat an Android phone like an Android phone.
And that's a big deal to some people, especially if Chen wants this to be adopted by the
it's a big deal to the only people that they sell phones to, which are enterprises and IT admins who want to deploy this without a headache. But it's a big deal to sell to their customers who are running BES 10 or BES 12 and know that it's not going to be a nightmare to deploy. So they can give their CEO, hey, you want an Android phone? Here's your Android phone. It's also a BlackBerry phone. Get out of my face. Like, yeah, it's I would almost say crucial to their sales strategy, based
And it's
upon
also
what their offering is.
it's also going to be crucial to the carrier sales strategy, right? Because I think that there's this preconceived notion in the enterprise world that Android is inherently insecure. And Samsung's done a lot to try to counter this argument, but Google's also tried a lot of different ways to counter this argument. Android for Work is still, it's a burgeoning, slowly building product, but it's not nearly as popular as I think Google would like it to be at this point.
Of which BlackBerry is a participant, right?
It is absolutely, and all of the OEMs are participants. But there's something valuable about having the BlackBerry name still behind this idea of security. I think that's really one of the last bastions of goodwill that BlackBerry can get away with, in the sense that they say, you know, with no trepidation, we are used by governments, by Fortune 500s, and we don't get hacked. We are great under pressure. We are great at security. We're great at privacy, and you want our suite of products. And if you buy a BlackBerry branded phone, whether it's on Android or BlackBerry 10, we can give you that same experience.
Yeah, I know, but going to the selling point though, because the device is called the Priv, and I don't think, while direct sales, like there are people that understand this stuff, I don't know if the carriers are even going to kind of touch that messaging. Like they'll say security, but like it's all about the problem with this stuff is it's all about the underlying details and really technical stuff that don't ladder up in the way that, hey, the camera's good now is. So when we're talking about sales, did Chen had set some sales targets for this thing?
He wants to sell 5 million units,
which is 5 times what they've sold in a year.
Well, they sold 800,000 devices, or they sold through 800,000 devices last quarter.
Oh shit,
not
really?
A lot. Yeah.
So that would be, so they want to sell basically 50% more than they did last year.
They want to sell 50% more of this particular product.
I thought he just said, I thought the target was just for handsets and not specifically this.
It can't be because the ASP of BlackBerry devices is like $280, right? So I'm thinking the Priv is going to be an $800 device. This is going to be a passport level device. The ASP, for them to make a profit, I'm guessing the ASP their margins have to be much higher than they are today.
No. But I'm just saying, when he said that target of how many phones he wants to sell next year, was he specifically referring to how many of this phone I want to sell, or of BlackBerry smartphones in total? Because I'm supposing, and I think I'm pretty accurate in this, that this will not be the only phone that they release for sale next year.
I don't know about that. I don't think, well, I mean, who knows, but I don't think so. You know, what's the point of continuing to iterate on their BlackBerry 10 platform?
I have to do some work this weekend.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. And I'm sure that they will release a bunch of other phones, but whether or not they're going to continue with a bi-platform strategy or whether they're going to go whole hog into Android remains to be seen. Yeah. And would that even be a good idea, right? They're going to continue releasing security patches for BlackBerry 10 indefinitely. But if they are saying that Android will provide the same user experience with the same app ecosystem that all other Android users take advantage of today, then what's the point of continuing R&D on BlackBerry 10?
So, but the tech thing, so like they still don't have root level access to Android in the way that they do with BlackBerry 10. Like there's a lot of stuff that they do security wise that happens like before anything else happens on a phone that I'm sure they don't have access to and running, like, or not sure, but would likely not. Regardless,
but here's the thing:
phones are built on 3-year cycles, so even with this coming out, there probably is some other BlackBerry 10 related device that might contribute to this. I just don't think. I think we would have to go back to the quote. I don't think it should be Priv needs to sell 5 million units next year, or BlackBerry's out of mobile. It's BlackBerry needs to sell 5 million devices next year, or they're done with mobile. / walk it back / blog post / Jen's too honest.
Fine, but whatever the case may be, they don't need to come to market with new BlackBerry 10 devices in order to do that. They're still selling the Q10.
True. Yes.
They have the classic. And the classic is running now 4-year-old hardware. You know, this is a company that is not worried about keeping its devices on the market for much longer. The product cycles for these BB10 devices are 3 to 4 times longer than the traditional Android or iPhone cycle. I mean, maybe not iPhone, but Android cycle. And what we're seeing here is that they have every intention of keeping these phones updated. I mean, you know, all credit where it's due. They've kept the Z10 and Q10 updated to the latest version of BlackBerry, with no qualms about performance, no effects on you know, features. Everything that they bring to new versions of BB10 come to those older devices. So there's no reason
you said that with a straight face. When was the last time you used the Z10? Real talk.
I'm not saying it's a good experience. The Z10 looks like crap. The whole piece of the whole hardware it's not good. But my mom uses a Q10, and she upgraded to 10.3.2, and it runs well. It looks way better than 10.1 and 10.2. So just that UI update, the flat icons, you know, simplified UX, these are good things for the entire BlackBerry 10 ecosystem. I'm not saying it's for me, but I'm saying that there's no need for BlackBerry to keep pushing out money-losing hardware when they're going all in on BlackBerry on Android, and they can continue selling the Leap and the Passport and the Z30 and the, you know, Q5. I mean, there are like 6 BlackBerry 10 devices out there, and it doesn't seem like they're going anywhere.
Yeah, but I think at the end of the day, like, for them to get to the targets that they need to for mobile to be profitable, they have to release new phones. They have to release new something, because those previous devices that you're talking about that they could sell, that the margins are now better on because they're probably super cheap, people weren't buying in droves in the first place, right?
But then why are they, if they release a Classic 2 or a Passport 2, why are people going to buy that? What is the purpose? If they're not selling them in the first place, merely upgrading the hardware is not going to solve the problem that most people don't want to buy a BlackBerry 10 device.
Yeah.
As we go, as Android and iOS matures and the app ecosystem chasm increases, BlackBerry 10 is going to become increasingly niche. Microsoft is trying to address this with they're a Goliath, and they're having trouble addressing this problem.
Totally. And they announced 2 phones that I'm sure that they don't even care sell right now. They just need to have those phones available while they make Windows. So I guess the big thing here is, has BlackBerry entirely given up on its platform and is now just a services provider?
Well, I mean, that's the one argument for BlackBerry continuing to release BB10 phones, is that they can create new pieces, they can create new software and use those phones as launching points for that new software. And that makes a lot of sense for them, especially if they can make that money back. It's just that it seems like quarter after quarter, they're not making that, you know, baseline bare minimum amount of money back on each product. But yes, I think that if they're a software and services company and they're buying, you know, they're buying large scale, you know, mobile device management, you know, companies, then what's the problem? Oh, I'm getting an echo. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you that they probably will release new phones, and I'm sure that they're going to try and beat their head against the wall to figure out how to make money in this really, really difficult mobile environment. But they're not the only ones struggling. I mean, we focus on them a lot, but Motorola's struggling. HTC is really struggling. You know, even companies like Samsung and LG are struggling. Sony is dire. You know, so it's not a matter of, okay, BlackBerry can't make any money. It's like nobody's making any money if your name isn't Apple.
Well, it's if you don't own the platform, it's hard to profit from it. So,
but if you own the platform and it's not the best platform, then it's hard to profit from it as well.
Well, sorry, if you don't own the platform that anyone's interested in, yeah. Well, so then let's talk. I think this is a good transition to Microsoft because they're a company that has, it seemed, really turned a corner and is implementing a really revitalized kind of strategy, and I think some new objectives even when it comes to what they're doing from like top to bottom approach. And I know a lot of this kind of extends outside the mobile SERP purview in terms of like beyond mobile stuff, but I don't know. Microsoft is making some moves. They're doing some things.
Yeah, I think Microsoft's doing really well, and I also agree that something unexpectedly exciting happened when they unified Windows 10, because what they're doing is they're making it a lot easier for developers to get involved in the ecosystem again. So even though, I mean, let's not cut ahead. Let's talk a bit about the actual products that they announced. They announced 5 major products, 2 phones, well, 3 phones, but the third one's not that important. The Lumia 950, it's a 5.2-inch Windows 10 mobile device. It's got a Snapdragon 808, 3 gigs of RAM. You know, it's a spec house. It's got a great Lumia camera, 20 megapixel camera with OIS and an f1.9 lens. There's the 950 XL, which is the same but a bit more powerful. It's got Snapdragon 810 and same camera, but it's a little bit bigger, 5.7-inch QHD display. So these are devices that are going to run Windows 10 mobile. They've shown off in preview versions the software for the last almost year now. I mean, I think the first Windows 10 mobile technical previews were available in February, and it's improved a lot since then. I'm running it on my Lumia 830, and I like it a lot. I think it's a really nice looking, nice feeling operating system that has some clear advantages over Android and iOS. And if they can get developers involved, which they seem to be having an easier time doing now that there's a unified app platform, I don't see why this couldn't be popular again.
What are those clear advantages?
Well, I think that there's a compromise between the closed off ecosystem of iOS and that more customizable open palette of Android with Windows Mobile. I think that developing apps for Windows is actually quite a lot easier than Android. And a lot of people that, and I'm not a developer, but from what I've heard, the Visual Studio, Microsoft's entire development platform, C++, seems to be a bit more well developed. And at the same
Java
time,
sucks.
And at the same time, they've added hooks for iOS and Android apps to be converted in a couple of different ways to Windows. So we have the potential to see Android apps ported over. We have the potential to see iOS apps ported over, plus native Windows 10 apps, universal apps that run on the desktop, tablets, laptops, and mobile without too much trouble. And I think this is their big move for mobile. But I also think that there's an acknowledgement within the release of these 2 phones that they don't really need to sell in volume because they're willing to build up this brand over time. You know, that Lumia brand to them is important, mostly in name. And I think the Surface,
propagation of Windows 10 right now is more important than the propagation of the phones which would run Windows 10 right now.
Yeah, and I think the Surface brand is going to take over that Lumia brand in the next couple of in the next year or even sooner.
So you're saying we'll see Surface phones?
Yeah, I think that we'll see a Surface branded phone next year. It makes a lot of sense if you look at the way that they're trying to cover all of their bases. They've focused on the Surface tablet. Then a larger Surface Pro tablet. Now they have the Surface Book, which is a full-fledged laptop. It's a convertible, but it's a laptop. And now they have these Lumia phones that almost look like they're separate from that Surface brand. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw the same design language that we see in the Surface Pro and the Surface Book move to the phones, and Microsoft leaves behind that Lumia brand. They leave behind that Nokia kind of legacy of, if you see that Lumia 950 from the back, that is a Nokia phone. Totally. That is the same design language that we've seen since the Lumia 800 or whatever in 2011.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. That just makes me, and it might actually be smart just because I think the Surface products are pretty sexy in terms of the hardware. I think there's probably better brand awareness and sentiment when it comes to Surface products. Surprisingly now, that's a weird thing to say now, but it's true, compared to, say, Lumia. That just makes me so damn sad to think that that's like we're really going to just end up at a point where you have the Surface Book, the Surface tablet, the Surface phone, and Lumia is just like all vestiges of Nokia are just gone.
Yeah, it is sad.
But even in that moment, I'm still thinking, man, a Surface phone would look sexy. It would look so sexy.
It would.
And it would have a clip-on keyboard. Isn't that cool?
Oh God!
Could you imagine? We see you, Priv, and we raise you a clip-on keyboard.
It's a $130 add-on. But I think Patrick O'Rourke was down there for us, our new staff writer, and he did a great job covering all of the products. We didn't even talk about the band, the Microsoft Band 2. So
yeah.
But that is what it is.
Continuing experiment. We still don't know what to do with this thing, but we're going to make sure it tracks as much as possible. We're going to continue to iterate. The thing's going to disappear in 5 months, and then there'll be a Band 3. Like they don't know what it is yet, but they're continuing to be in the space.
It's an experiment, and I think that it's great that Microsoft's experimenting.
Yeah, totally.
So what I'll say about the Surface, about the Lumias, is that they have this Windows 10 Continuum feature, where you can plug them in. It uses USB-C, and there's going to be adapters for DisplayPort and HDMI, and you'll be able to plug it into a monitor and use these devices with Bluetooth keyboards and mice and actually have a fully fledged or almost fully fledged Windows 10 PC living inside your phone. And I think that's really interesting, even though it's running an ARM processor, an ARM chip, so that the only apps that are going to be accessible are the ones on the Windows Store. So you won't be able to use fully fledged legacy x86 based apps. But other than that, I mean, we're far beyond the Windows RT point in 2012 where there was nothing available in the Windows Store. I mean, there's some great titles in there.
Well, or just in the point where those apps were broken and terrible.
Right. I mean, if they existed at all, they were pretty bad experiences. But now there's a lot of meaningful content on the Windows Store, and Microsoft seems to understand how to engage developers. I mean, I was at Microsoft Build in May, and it was one of the coolest experiences I've ever been to see like 5,000 developers just screaming at the top of their lungs whenever there was an announcement. Like these guys love Microsoft, and they will live and die by Satya Nadella. Totally. This guy has completely I wouldn't say fixed, but he's repaired Microsoft's reputation when it comes to developers. He's made some serious strides into moving Microsoft into a platform and services company with Office, with Outlook. They've made some very smart strategic purchases with Wunderlist, with Acompli, and Sunrise, and I think that they're going to start integrating them. You know, it's not just a company that cares about Microsoft platforms anymore. I mean, they are doing great work on iOS and Android. So,
well, he's even said, like, I think The Verge did a great interview with him, where he's talked about, like, he cares less about the manager of Office 365 squeezing out profitability for 365 than making sure that everyone loves Office 365. Like, I think he's kind of cleansed Microsoft of that 90s style. We're a enterprise company who happens to peddle tech services to being like a tech company first that services both enterprise and consumer. Like, they feel like a tech company now. And you see it in their design, you see it in their approach, you see it. Yeah, it's interesting. I still don't know if I would use any of it because it's hard to switch over, or I don't know where to jump in.
Yeah, I've been using Windows 10 quite a bit, actually. I have a Surface Pro 3 here, and I really like it for the most part. It does a lot of things really well and better than OS X. And it's, you know, when you live on the web, it's easy to forgive some of those essential apps.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I rely on a few apps on OS X that aren't available on Windows, but for the most part, you know, I have an Adobe Creative Cloud subscription, so I can access Lightroom, I can access Premiere Pro and Audition.
Really?
From my Windows PC and have all my projects sync across to my Mac. You know, the essential services, Evernote, Todoist, the ones that I rely on every day, they're either web-based or they have native apps for both Windows and OS X. And I never quite feel like I'm missing out. It's just it's the little things. It's the trackpads. It's the jankiness when it comes to multitasking, when it comes to organizing your windows. It's not a matter of it being worse. So, you know, please don't like start with me about it being worse. It's just that I'm not used to it. I don't think that I don't think it's worse at all. And I think that
there are some components. Installing or updating Windows software is always a crapshoot and an exercise in frustration. Like, fundamentally. That's when they're the most PC.
Less so now. I have not had since Windows 10.
Since you were tweeting about it this morning.
Oh, no. That is something else. That is, so to give you a bit of context, my mom has she bought a 2014 Dell. It's a, you know, really nicely spec'd device. It came with Windows 8. And I upgraded it to Windows 10 using the normal means. I got the prompt from Microsoft saying, "Hey, Windows 10's available." I installed it, and a couple of weeks later, the computer crashed. It just wouldn't turn on. It gave that cannot detect a hard drive error when it loads. Mm-hmm. So they replaced the hard drive under warranty. And this morning, she texted me to say that the hard drive crashed again after installing Windows 10. Then a Dell technician comes to look at it and says, "Oh no, this computer is not supposed to run Windows 10. It's designed for Windows 8," which is absolutely BS, because every phone, every device that's optimized for Windows 8 is optimized for Windows 10 because they have the same minimum requirements. And Microsoft has made it super clear that any device running Windows 10, Windows 8 should be upgradable to Windows 10 without a problem. So it's that Dell's tech support doesn't understand what they're talking about, and they're giving her the runaround. And I think that it's a bad motherboard or a bad piece of RAM or something, because if they've if they've replaced the hard drive, or my guess is that they formatted the existing hard drive. And if the hard drive is actually bad, then they shouldn't have done that. They just formatted it and reinstalled Windows 8. And if that's the case, then it's going to continue happening over and over again. Do you have the
serial numbers on that?
Oh yeah, I mean it's under warranty.
No, did you
the actual hard drive serial numbers? No, because I wasn't there. She lives far, so I don't have access to her actual computer.
Yeah. See, this is the, oh man, I don't even want to get into this stuff. I guess so. Beyond that, so you're basically saying in general that living in the Windows world is not painful, which is great. I totally get that. I don't do a lot of computer-based gaming, so that's not there for me. But I totally appreciate that that's a thing. I think for me is that I live in a Google world that runs on Apple hardware, and what's going to make me go over?
Well, like, exactly. What's your incentive to switch? Google is so well represented on Apple, on the Apple ecosystem.
Well, and then also not represented in the Windows ecosystem, right?
Well, they're actively unrepresented unless you're on the mobile web, unless you're on the web.
Now, is a tablet the thing that's going to get me there? No. Is a phone? Maybe, if it's like a crazy good phone. The laptop, is that the end? Like, is the Surface the Surface Book?
From what I've seen, is stunning, and it's really, really well designed.
Do I want to take off the screen?
You don't have to. You should never have to. It's a laptop first that has a detachable screen. It's not something that you have to buy the keyboard separately.
Yeah.
So I think Microsoft's addressing the major issue with the Surface and the Surface Pro is that the type cover is a separate purchase, and that they're marketing the Surface as a tablet that can replace your laptop. But the Surface Book is fundamentally a laptop. It doesn't have any of that, that kickstand craziness. It's just a laptop, and if you want to take the screen off, you can.
It just seems still so hedgy. It still seems like just make a decision and stick with it.
But I
don't want to have to think about that.
They said we'll leave it to our OEM partners to create laptops. We are all in on 2-in-1s. They've been saying that since 2012.
Well, okay, yeah, and then they released a laptop.
They did. Well, they didn't. I mean, they released a 2-in-1. They believe that the future of the laptop is the 2-in-1.
Yeah, and you know what that is? That's trying to not piss off the OEMs as much, and maybe some legal. There's a reason why it's called a book and not a laptop, right? But
well,
no,
I think that's a bit conspiratorial of you.
It's not. No, come on, man. Their bread has always been buttered by OEM partners.
Exactly, and they have to still be on their side. I mean, they're treading some fine water here.
But they also realized that wasn't working before, which is why they started making hardware in the first place.
But it's not working. It's okay. Is it not working? I mean, are Windows 10 devices
it
not selling in
wasn't.
volume?
That's why the Surface program even started, right? That's why.
They wouldn't admit that. They did the Surface for the same reason Google started making Nexus products. They want the platonic ideal,
which is the exact same reason,
of hardware and software running together. And
they needed to make their own high-end product. We talked about this earlier in the podcast. So that not working. PCs weren't selling anymore.
Well, I think they needed to create a template for OEMs to follow.
I completely agree.
The Nexus program did the same thing. If the Nexus program didn't exist, then OEMs would probably still feel free to bastardize their Android skins with garish features and whatever's.
And part of that template involves a laptop, whatever little dance they do in front of it to not upset manufacturers, right? Like, they didn't have to worry about upsetting anyone when they were making a Windows tablet, because no one was buying Windows tablets, and there was no Windows Phone OEMs to worry about that. And then they bought the only one. There are a lot of Windows-based laptops out there that are sold.
Yeah.
So
and Microsoft's not getting into the $300 laptop market. They're going after the high-end market. They're going after the $1,200, $1,500 laptop market, which is very small. Nobody is really looking to buy a $1,500 laptop anymore, unless you really want that explicit laptop. I mean, the Lenovo Carbon line is really nice, but does it make up the majority of their sales? I would assume not. They're making their money from the idea books and the Lenovo, whatever the Y
ThinkPad.
Well, the ThinkPads are still fantastic, but they're definitely aimed at a specific market. And I think we underestimate how many Fortune 500 companies and how many offices are still floundering on older Windows hardware.
Oh, I don't underestimate that at all. I was trapped in that life, man. It's not a fun life. Those ThinkPads are heavy. They're big.
Yeah.
Could stop a bullet. But yeah, okay. So in some, Microsoft, yay. It's cooler when there are more companies making moves and smart moves. I just don't have, I guess it's still the same thing. If I had if Microsoft had released all these services earlier, if they had made the switch in 2001 or 2005 instead of 2015, we might all just be still Outlook users and things like that. But Google's got all my stuff. I wouldn't even.
That's because Outlook was a bloated piece of crap that nobody wanted to use. They were just forced to use it.
I know. That's what I was saying. But well, some people really love Outlook, but those people are crazy.
No, but today's Outlook has been informed by Microsoft's realization.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. If they had realized that in 2005, when I was,
but there was no such thing. Apple wasn't showing them up in almost every respect in 2005.
But Google was.
No, they weren't. Google didn't know design. Google
didn't stop people from using Gmail or not paying for Microsoft Word because Docs existed.
Right, but that was because Microsoft didn't have a viable online cloud-based competitor at the time.
No, sorry. I disagree. That was their viable online cloud competitor. And I'm saying if Microsoft had made these decisions at that time, if they had disrupted themselves rather than waiting to be disrupted, I would probably be using a bunch of Microsoft services rather than Google services.
Potentially. But I also think that they dug themselves a hole with their Hotmail brand, and they didn't transition people to live quickly enough.
Also, transitioning to live is not a fun experience.
No, I mean, they messed up. I mean, Microsoft under Ballmer was just a series of unfortunate events that led to him leaving. And I think Microsoft now acknowledges where they went wrong, and they're still earning $50 billion a quarter. I mean, this is a $40 billion a quarter.
$9 billion verticals that I get that. I'm just saying, what's the thing that's going to make people just be like, yeah, man, I got to get some of that sweet Windows or that Microsoft product?
Or is it just maybe the Surface Book?
Yeah, okay. If that's the thing, what would be the next Microsoft product that you'd buy first party?
First party, I would totally buy a Surface Book. If I had, I mean, the problem is that for what I do a lot of video encoding. I would need that $2,500, $3,000 Surface Book. Just like if I were to buy another Mac, I would need to buy a high-end MacBook Pro. So it's a matter of, I don't think, unlike 4 or 5 years ago when I transitioned from Windows 7 to OS X, and I found OS X to be so much better in almost every regard. I think today the experiences are comparable, and it's just a matter of figuring out which ecosystem you're more comfortable in.
Mm-hmm.
So I really don't think the differences are that great anymore. A lot of what Apple did with Yosemite and with El Capitan was to take the best of what was already in Windows 8 and Windows 10 and put it on a platform that it had been unifying with iOS for the last 3 or 4 years.
So, I haven't even noticed a single El Capitan thing yet. Like, I haven't noticed.
Have you upgraded?
Yeah. I haven't noticed a new feature.
Just move your mouse really quickly to find your mouse cursor.
Whoa! It got bigger.
That's pretty much the only thing.
Awesome.
Well, it's not, but you know what I'm saying. So I think we're about to turn into pumpkins.
Yeah, we have 4 minutes till the podcast breaks.
So we will leave it there. We are back, folks. We will do this every week if it kills us. Literally, if we are dying in a ditch somewhere, I will take out my phone and record a SyrupCast next week. Thank you so much for coming back. If you have come back, if you aren't here, we miss you. So please tell your friends. Leave us a great review.
Baby, come back.
Listen to Douglas sing. There will be more of that next
Gonna pod for you.
Yeah, I like it.
'Cause I just can't pod without you.
I don't even know what to say. I'm gonna shed a tear.
I wish I had a bat to flip right now.
All right, that's it. See you next week. We love you guys. Peace.